Good evening. I'm Mary Holbein, President of the League of Women Voters of Downers Grove, Woodridge, and Lisle. On behalf of that league and of the League of Women Voters of Wheaton and the League of Women Voters of Naperville, I would like to welcome you to this evening's webinar. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization devoted to voters' rights and services and voter education. By nonpartisan, we mean that we do not support or oppose any political candidate or political party. We are, however, issue advocates. Before we advocate for a position on any issue, we undertake a painstaking study to determine that position. Along with local league chapters all over the state of Illinois, we are currently engaged in a study to update our position on criminal justice. To learn more about the many aspects of the criminal justice study, please see the information on all our local league websites and on the League of Women Voters of Illinois website. Please submit any questions you might have during the webinar in the Q&A. Tonight's webinar will highlight one aspect of that study, policing. Our speaker is a highly respected member of the law enforcement community. Brian Cunningham became chief of the Woodridge Police Department in November of 2016. Prior to that, he was deputy chief at the Naperville Police Department. Cunningham, who was also directing the investigations division of his department in Naperville, has been working in law enforcement for 3 decades. Brian Cunningham studied at Governors State University to obtain his bachelor's degree in criminal justice before attending Northwestern University Staff and Command, the Colorado State University Rocky Mountain Leadership Course, and the Senior Management Institute for Policing at Boston University. That doesn't end his list of accomplishments, though. Cunningham is also a member of the Woodridge Honor Guard Unit, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, is a founding member and current president of the Illinois Homicide Investigation Association, DuPage County Police of Chiefs Executive Board member, and has been an adjunct professor at the College of DuPage. Since coming to Woodridge, Chief Cunningham has initiated a school program called GRIT in place of the DARE program. The GRIT program helps kids develop strategies for dealing with disappointments and difficult situations. He also participates in the Village Leadership Academy, the Citizens Police Academy, and community roll call meetings. In November of 2019, he participated in a public meeting sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Downers Grove, Woodridge, and Lisle about the firearms restraining order, what it is, and how it works. Turn it over to the chief now.
Thank you very much, Mary. Like Mary had said, I've been in law enforcement over 3 decades, 35 years to be exact. And I can tell you that in my 35 years, I've seen a lot of different things, and the job has changed completely in those 35 years. And I'll talk a little bit about that tonight. But the topic tonight is we wanted to talk about 21st century policing. And it's something that's been around for a while. And the one thing I want to caution everybody is the 21st Century Policing Report was kind of sent out nationally, right? So it has to look at different size police departments. And I can tell you for a fact that Woodridge, it's considered a medium to small size police department. We have 60 officers. There's 35,000 people in Woodridge. But the issues that we face are often very different than say what Chicago would face, Chicago Police Department. And I was telling, when we were talking before the actual Zoom meeting started, I was telling people how for Woodridge, I can reach out to my officers and the people that work on our department and talk to everyone in 2 days. Where in Chicago, you wouldn't do that in 30 years. You wouldn't be able to talk to those. So to affect change and to drive initiatives is a lot easier in a smaller organization, and that's why I prefer to work in an organization that size. But today we're going to talk about the 21st Century Policing Report, and I'll open up to questions about the report itself. But I'm sure there's other questions that people have that are as far as current legislation, and I'll try to answer whatever questions come my way the best I can. But for this 21st Century Police Report, I'm going to look at it from the lens of a Woodridge police officer and a Woodridge resident and the Woodridge police chief. So We'll start out and we'll talk about the pillars that were developed. And actually, I should kind of give you a little background. This report was developed in 2015, and it was in response to the Ferguson riots and the death of Michael Brown, who was shot by a police officer, a Ferguson police officer. At that time, when this report came out, I was pretty fortunate. I was at Boston University and a leadership course that I was taking there. And one of the speakers was Charles Ramsey. Charles Ramsey used to be deputy chief in in Chicago. And then he moved out to Washington, D.C., where he was a law enforcement leader there. And he's always been kind of someone I admire in police work. We kind of grew up in the same neighborhood, which I always found interesting. He saw some of the things I saw. He's older than me, but we saw kind of the same things. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. We went to the same schools. Our career paths were similar. He was involved in investigations for a lot of his career, as was I. But obviously then he moved on to huge leadership positions. And he was the co-chair of the 21st Century Policing Report. So after it was written, he came and spent a day with me at Boston University. I was in a course where there was probably 65 leaders, police leaders from across the country and from out of the country too. And we discussed the 21st Century Policing Report, actually before it was actually disseminated to law enforcement. So kind of like a ground level view of it. And we spent the whole day talking about it. He asked us to pick it apart, what he thought was going to be good, what he thought he was going to see resistance on, what they could have done better, which I liked that. He was very open about it. So we had a very pointed conversation about it. And then eventually the 21st Century Police Report came out to all the agencies, and I was able to watch the responses, right? From officers, especially the line level officers. And at first, and actually it took a long time for even officers to read it. And I think, I know for a fact, actually, because many officers came and told me that they didn't like the fact that it came from the Ferguson situation. They felt it was damning to police officers, and it was kind of holding police responsible for every problem in the criminal justice system. But what I did to encourage my officers is I said, just read it, right? Read the report. And there's going to be some things that you disagree with there and there. And I do too. There's things that I disagree with. But overall, overwhelmingly, the things in the 21st Century Police Report are exactly the blueprint that we should be following. And a blueprint that we have already been following in most instances. So I'll talk about that, where we were before the report came out, when the report came out, what we did better, and where we're moving in the future. So the first pillar in the report is building trust and legitimacy. And to me, that's the basis of our profession. A lot of times I always reflect on history in this country of law enforcement, and also in European history for law enforcement. And I'm a big fan of Robert Peel. Robert Peel said the police are the community and the community are the police. And that's when I became a police officer, that's exactly what I felt and still feel to this day. But I also seen Robert Peel's principles disregarded. My parents are from Ireland. During the course of my upbringing and with my family, I've learned a lot about Irish history, in particular to Northern Ireland, and how the police force there disenfranchised the public. And I think people would remember in the call the troubles in Ireland, and a lot of my family had gone through that. And when I decided, my parents immigrated here, when I told my father that I wanted to be a police officer, that's the conversation that we had. He talked about how he didn't trust the police in Ireland, and he expected me not to be that way, and that trust was important. And I took that to heart and still do to this day. So it's important to recognize where law enforcement was, the mistakes that law enforcement made. And I think history teaches a lot of lessons. And that's a part of building trust and legitimacy. And that was part of one of the points that the commission on the task force report actually brought out. And some of the points that they bring up is it should be based on procedural justice. And that's basically giving people a voice. as a police officer, remaining neutral, right? And I try to do that as best as I can all the time. Some people will always say, Chief, you always bring up facts or figures, and I do that intentionally because in the facts and the figures, that's where the neutrality comes from. So I always refer to those, and I always kind of force my command staff to look at the facts and figures. What are the numbers telling us? What are the facts telling us? That's an important message for us. It's not the most important message. It's combined with the other factors as well, but it's something we need to look at constantly. And when you think about traffic stops, that's important. Traffic stops with minorities. Those are the things that I'm always looking at, those numbers. Another factor for procedural justice is respect, right? There's no way you can do this job, being a police officer, without respecting people. And I always tell people a story that when I was a younger officer, I was working in narcotics, and we were doing a search warrant and for somebody that was selling narcotics. We got in the house, and I was dealing with the gentleman that was the suspect in the case, and I handcuffed him right away because that was our procedure at the time. But I handcuffed him in front of his 9-year-old son. And at the time, I really didn't think about it. I was just thinking about what I was supposed to do, right? That was the safety, officer safety risk. And then I had a sergeant that pulled me aside and said, I want to talk to you about that. And I said, okay. And he kind of explained to me that I didn't have to do that, right? He understands that we have a rule of procedures, but sometimes you don't always have to follow that. And that, you know, the fact that I handcuffed him in front of his son, that damaged his relationship with his son. And that's what he was worried about. And man, did that hit me hard. That was probably my 3rd year on the job. And I never forgot that conversation I had with that sergeant to this day. So I always tell myself, and I tell my officers, put yourself in that person's shoes, right? And treat that person like you don't want to be treated. It's an important lesson I learned early on in my career. And I'm glad that that officer pointed it out to me, or that sergeant pointed it out to me. And lastly, as far as procedural justice is trust, right? And I started out talking about it. And if you don't have trust, the trust of the people you're dealing with, you can't get anything accomplished. So as far as this pillar 1, it's something that most law enforcement, I would like to say that everyone, but obviously there's some officers that don't believe in this, but and most officers realize the importance of building trust with the community. It's something we work on every day. And it's my goal to meet somebody every day, somebody that I don't know. And it may not be an in-depth conversation, but as I'm gassing up my squad, somebody in the gas station, I'm walking up to just saying hi, and just that smile or just that recognition of somebody, that may be an opening to creating a great relationship, or at least building some trust, a foundation of trust. So that's something I always enforce with my officers and tell them what a difference it makes. One of the other points that it brings up in building trust and legitimacy is emphasizing non-law enforcement activities. And I can tell you, when I first started as a police officer, your success as a police officer in my early career was measured on how many arrests you made. And I made a lot of arrests. I was involved in narcotics investigations. I was involved in violent crimes. And when I was a young officer, a patrol officer, if I wasn't making 2 arrests a day, I felt like I wasn't doing my job. Obviously, I learned a lot moving through the years, and I recognize that that is not the important thing. It is important to arrest people, right, if they're doing somebody wrong, especially in violent crimes. But we have totally transitioned from that earlier time when I first started in the 80s to now, today. I could tell you the difference in our law enforcement activity is complete opposite of what it used to be. And arrests are not stressed, especially in Woodridge. What I stress with my officers is do something, give me something, right? One of the things we started a couple of years ago when I first started there is extra patrols, right? I think it's important for officers to be in the neighborhoods, checking their businesses. And I came up with a formula to kind of calculate how often we do that. And the officers really took to it. And this last year, we had over 5,000 business checks, officer-initiated business checks, where they're actually getting out and talking to the business owners, and 4,000 residential checks. And I'm shocked by those numbers. So on 4,000 occasions, we've actually got out. And what we do is we have a vacation watch program in Woodridge. If you're going on vacation, you just, we call it the frontline program. You could put it in the program, and the officers will know when you're going on vacation. They'll actually go to your house and check your house to make sure it's okay. And this is a twofold process for me. You're making sure that that resident's house is okay. But if there's somebody that wants to do a burglary in that neighborhood, they're seeing the officer in the neighborhood, right? And it's going to be a deterrent factor. You don't always able to qualify that, but I know it's actually true because we've seen the numbers drop in our burglaries, especially to motor vehicles, when we started this program. So the officers check the home, they put it in the software program, and the actual resident gets a notification via email that the officer was at their house, and they check the house and everything's okay. And I can't tell you the response that I've gotten from the community once we started this program. They love it. One of the residents once sent me an email saying that he was poolside enjoying the sun, and all of a sudden gets this notice that somebody checked his house and his house is fine. And he said they made that vacation that much more special for him. So it's those kind of programs that we emphasize and stress that this is important, right? It's important to make traffic stops. It's important to deter traffic accidents and speeding, but it's also important to that outreach to the business community and to the residents. So I'm really proud of that. And coupled with that, we expanded it to the parks and actually to foot patrols too. So we're gonna, for the year 2020, we'll be at about 14,000 officer initiated extra patrols. And that's something I'm proud of, right? And if you would have asked me 30 years ago, I would have said, no, we got crime prevention officers to do that, right? We have a unit that does that. There's 2 or 3 officers that are assigned to that. That's what I would have told you. That's how we would handle it back in the 80s or the 90s. And that the more important thing was arresting people. Right now, in this era, I'm so proud of that. I'm so proud that the officers took to this. And it's made a huge difference with the community and into our crime statistics as well. It's dropped our crime statistics. One of the other points that we really reach out in Woodridge is as far as building trust and legitimacy, and I talked a little bit about it earlier with the moderators, is the immigrant community. And we have significant immigrant population in Woodridge. Latinx, we have an Egyptian population, Moldovan population, African American. So it's very, very diverse, and we specifically reach out to those communities. And I could tell you a situation with the African American community. When I first got there, I specifically, the first month I just drove around and talked to anybody I could talk to. But there's 2 barbershops in particular that I really wanted to go in and talk to people. And one was a traditional Caucasian barbershop, nothing remarkable. But the other one was an African American that owned the barbershop. And I made a strong connection with the owner of that barbershop and visit him often. And we've worked together on a lot of different projects in the community. He's helped me out a lot. And when I first started doing that, some of the officers came to me and said, that guy's got a criminal history. And I said, well, is he doing anything now? Well, we suspect him. I said, well, let me know if you find out that he's doing anything. Then obviously we'll have to do what we have to do. So I waited a month, I waited 2 months, nothing happened. Then I went back to that officer and I said, so you've been working on this. Have you seen anything? He goes, absolutely not. I go, well, then he's obviously not doing anything wrong, right? So we should be reaching out to him. And then that officer went down and met him with me, which I thought was a huge win for both of us and the department and the community. So those are the kind of things we've been working on as far as building trust. When the riots and the looting was happening after the George Floyd situation, I made a point of going to all our businesses and talk to them face to face. And one of the residents I ran into said, he asked me, he goes, why hasn't Woodridge had any riots or any looting? And I said, I really don't know, and I'm not actually planning on any of them. You tell me why. And he told me, because you guys have been talking about this. It's not perfect here. He says, you got a lot of work to do as a community, but you guys have been talking about this for several years. And I felt good about that. And it wasn't directing it at me. He was directing it at my officers too, which was definitely more special than just saying that I was doing it. So it's a constant goal for us. It's something we have to work on every single day. And the sad part is something will happen in Chicago or in Wisconsin or in Minnesota that sets us back, right? And that's the frustrating part. But you know, I tell the officers, hey, we have to do our thing, right? We can control what we can control. And I think we get the recognition from the community that we're doing the best we can. So those are the number one thing is this building trust and legitimacy. That's pillar one. Pillar two is policy and oversight. And the commission had talked about creating clear and consistent department policies that guide the use of force. And this is something that I'm very, very interested in. I have been interested in my whole career about our policies and how our policies dictate what we do, and how policies shouldn't be a book that sits on a shelf that has dust on it. And when something bad happens, you open it. In my opinion, the policies have to be a living, breathing document that you're constantly looking at. And I tell people, I said, we're adjusting our policies, we're changing our policies, and they ask me, like other chiefs have asked me, well, what went wrong? Well, nothing went wrong. We just figured we need to change it, right? Because it's a constant changing environment. Policing is changing constantly, and it's something we need to look at all the time. We use a system called Lexipol, and it presents our policies in an electronic form to us. But what I like about this system, every day we get a question posed to us that we have to answer, creates discussion in the roll call, and you have to respond to it and actually answer what the policy question is. And it could be about use of force, it could be about arrest procedures, it could be about diversity, it could be about implicit bias. Every day we get a question related to our policy. So it's constantly reinforcing what our policies are. When George Floyd, after every big event, we always look at our policies and see, and what I always try to do is what if the George Floyd situation happened in Woodridge? And I get my command staff, and I usually invite a couple officers in and some sergeants, and I say, what if this happened? How would we handle it? Could this happen in Woodridge? And tell me if it could, and if it couldn't, tell me why. And oftentimes we go back to our policy. Well, our policy tells us this, this, and this, and this. But after that George Floyd situation, we looked at all our policies again, our use of force policies. And one of the things I was concerned about was we had a policy, it was called a shoulder pin restraint. And if done properly, it momentarily makes you unconscious. And I was concerned about this because if done improperly, it would look like a chokehold, or it could be a chokehold, depending on if you're struggling with somebody. And one of the things I said, we got to look at this policy. And before the actual recommendation came out from Lexipol and all the attorneys, within 2 days of George Floyd, we had changed that policy and trained it differently. So it's something we're always looking at. And the important part is when we talk about policy is it's one thing to change the policy, but automatically starting training on it is huge for us. And especially when it comes to like use of force and defensive tactics, something that our officers have to be prepared for. We try to put them in realistic situations and scenarios. So when that scenario actually happens in real life, they're not surprised by it. They can think in their mind, I've been here before, I've talked about this, I know what our policy is, and I know how to handle this. So it's something we work on quite often. Let me see here. Pillar 3, is technology and social media. And I'm not saying that I'm great at this, but when I came to Woodridge, the technology and the social media and the outreach via social media was pretty much non-existent. And I knew that that's something we needed to work on. So one of the things, first off, is I wanted to make sure that we increased our transparency. And one way to do that is through social media and talk about it, make sure our policies are available to people so they could find them. They could go to our website and look at our policies. I have no problem sharing that. They could go and find out what kind of police department we are, but engaging people as much as possible through the media. It's not always the best form. Sometimes it gets kind of off the rails a little bit. You got to kind of monitor it. But it's important to gain a group of people from the community that are connected with the police department, and we can field those questions that they have for us. And also I can pose questions to them. So technology and social media have been huge for us on the police department. One of the things we do in every command staff meeting, it's one of my agenda items, is what are we going to put on social media? And if you're not following us on social media, I encourage you to do so. I think you'll find it very interesting. We try to keep it topical and lively, and we share as much information as we can. The other side of the social media part is people want to know if something happens. They want to know everything possibly, and certain things we can't release. Right? If there's an ongoing investigation, it could jeopardize the investigation, or it could jeopardize court proceedings. So I always try to tell people that, hey, I would love to tell you the whole story, but we can't do that until it reaches court. So you got to make sure that the people, the residents understand what that's about. So technology is something we work on constantly too. And this is one of the things that the commission had brought up was body cameras. And I know body cameras has been a topic for a long time. And I often wonder how come it's taken Illinois, in particular DuPage County law enforcement, so long to get engaged with body cameras. And I can tell you why from the perspective of Woodridge. When I went to Woodridge as the police chief in 2016, one of my goals was to incorporate body cameras. And I made it my goal. I said, give me 6 to 8 months to kind of look at what our best system is, what we can do. And I told my bosses, we're going to move forward with body cameras. Well, now it's 4.5 years later, and we are just now deploying body cameras this month, which I'm proud to say it's actually happening. So to get to the point where, I want body cameras, and convincing the officers it's the best thing, right? Because there was some resistance early on, and getting to the point where we can afford them is huge. We had a lot of discussions on the board level. What about the privacy issues? How does it relate to, if you're in a private situation? The FOIA issues have been problematic, and it's something we've been dealing with as chiefs, and I've been dealing with on several committees for almost 4 years, trying to change some of the policies. And eventually I got to the point where the policies don't matter to me anymore. It's important. The public expects officers to have body cameras, and I want our officers to have body cameras. And in fact, our officers want them too. So it's not the perfect situation. FOIAs are going to be a mess for us, right? We're going to be having to deal with FOIAs and redaction forever. We're going to have privacy issues that we're going to have to deal with. But it's just that important to us as far as Woodridge Police Department to get body cameras. And I know in DuPage County, there's been a big push. I've sent my memos and my workups and my budget to so many departments in DuPage County that I think we're going to see a big movement in the next 6 months for us to have body cameras in DuPage County. So that was the third pillar of the report, which I'm proud to say that we are finally at the point where we're moving forward with that. Pillar 4 is titled Community Policing and Crime Reduction. And we talk about community policing a lot. And like I said, when I first started my career, community policing was 2 or 3 officers that were in the community policing unit, and it was their job to do that. I can tell you now, in today's law enforcement, it's everybody's job to be involved in community policing. We've done a lot as far as the department goes. Mary had started off, she talked about our when I first started in Woodridge, we had a DARE program. It was very dated. I didn't like it at all. We developed a new program called GRIT, and it's based off of Angela Duckworth's book on GRIT. And what it is it has nothing to do with drugs at all. It has everything to do with resiliency, and that as a child, you're going to run into situations where you're not going to succeed. You're going to have disappointments, but how you handle those disappointments and move forward is the biggest thing. So we've developed a whole curriculum on it. District 68 was on board with the implementation of it and been a huge partner in it. And I'm proud to say that we rolled it out to 6th and 7th graders, and now we teach it from 1st grade up. We have a little stall now with COVID, so we're not quite where I want it to be, but I'm hoping now that the kids are getting back, that we'll get back on board and get it moving forward. It's been recognized in the state and the county as one of the most innovative school programs that are happening right now. So crime reduction is huge for me. And like I said, I like to look at the data. And I like to look at how implementing certain programs affect that data. And one of the things that I was really, really keen on was the implementation of that vacation watch program. How can the fact that we're putting officers in a neighborhood, will it affect our numbers? In the first year we started that program, one of the goals I had, which was very, very lofty for us, was burglary motor vehicles. I looked at that crime in particular to see if we can affect the outcome of it. And what I wanted to do was reduce our burglary motor vehicles under 100, which people thought I was crazy, right? Because people's cars get burglarized all the time. And the reason they get burglarized is because they don't lock them, right? It makes it hard for us to kind of stop that from happening. But I wanted to get it under 100. So in 2019, we were 82 burglary to motor vehicles, which was like a huge, huge record for us. This year, we're at 115. So we went over my 100 mark. But the COVID year of 2020 is different on all accounts. But that I truly believe that program had a huge, huge impact in reducing the neighborhood crime that we had. And twofold, it was actually helpful to the residents. It made them feel safe while they were away from their home, and people saw officers in the neighborhood all the time. So it was a huge, huge deal for us. So we're always looking for programs like that to kind of make a difference. The fifth pillar is training and education. And some of the knock on the task force when they came out with this is it's lofty, right? And it should be lofty when we talk about training and education. But we're dealing with budgets too, right? So when you're dealing with budgets, sometimes you don't get all the training that you want. I've made training a priority for our police department. It's every time I've been told to cut the budget, I refuse to cut the training budget. I'll get rid of cars, I'll get rid of equipment, but I won't cut the training budget. We have a lot of new officers, and I think a lot of departments are dealing with a big influx of newer officers, and it's important to train them. And I think a lot of the failures that we've had in law enforcement, probably from the 80s and 90s, was that lack of training, right? So I think it's important, it's key for us, and moving forward, it should be for everybody. And then the last pillar is something that I really take to heart, is officer wellness and safety. It's when I first started in law enforcement, we didn't talk about this at all. You didn't talk about the mental health of a police officer. It kind of implied you were weak, right? And you weren't capable of doing the job. So I spent a good 25 years of my law enforcement career never talking to anybody about the things that I seen. I never talked to my family about it. I didn't talk to my wife about it. And then I was probably about 25 years on, I was struggling with some issues, with some things that I've seen on the job. I was struggling sleeping. I had a hard time sleeping. I was agitated, and finally realized that I needed to talk to somebody. And I chose to talk to my family, right? They've always been there for me. They have been waiting for that to happen. And it made a huge, huge difference in my mental well-being. Now, it's been my goal as a police chief to make sure that people hear that story and they take it to heart, that that's what they need to do. You need to talk to somebody. And luckily for us, we've been doing that as a police department, and recognizing it and dealing with those stress levels as best as we can in the moment, rather than waiting for them to build up. And somebody had described it to me as your law enforcement careers, you're always carrying a backpack. And there may be not one significant event that kind of loads up your backpack, but every event you go to is a little pebble, and you throw it in your backpack, and you throw it in your backpack. And after 25 years, you can't carry that pack anymore. So I've always kind of used that that image to kind of help the younger officers to realize early on that they can't let that happen. So I was glad when the commission had done that. So one of the other things that we've worked on that I feel has been, we've been working on it since I've got to Woodridge, and I'll explain it, how it happened that way, is crisis intervention training. When I got to Woodridge, the officers didn't have that at all. I had it and had extensive training in it. And we had gone, the first year that I was there, we had gone to a call with an autistic individual, an adult, who was fighting with his parents. And after the event happened, after we were there, we ended up having to tase the individual. He was non-compliant. He was trying to fight with the officers. And it was justified, right? The officers were in their right to do that. They were at risk of getting hurt. But I called the parents, in particular, developed a relationship with the mom, and I asked her, I said, tell me, she witnessed it, and you've dealt with your son forever. He's autistic, and you know how to deal with him. How did we do as a police department? And she told me that we needed a lot of help. And I said, tell me why. And she says, just the language, the body language. It was escalated rather than de-escalated. And then I said, give me some time and we're going to work on this. So from that point on, we made it a goal to get everyone in our police department crisis intervention trained. And that's a week-long class. It talks to you or teaches you how to deal with crisis interventions with people with mental health, people with autism, but also people, just regular people that are agitated. And I think that's the important part of it. And I can tell you, since we've gone through that training, we have been to that house 3 more times. The second time the officers went there, they decided not to even go inside. They waited outside. The parents came outside. They waited for the individual who was highly agitated. He's difficult to deal with, there's no doubt. And then when he was calmed down, then we went inside. The third time, a different shift did the exact same thing. So all those officers were trained in that. They did things differently, which I thought was important. So it's something we worked on. And a lot of times, what I'll talk about is, especially when it comes to use of force, one of the things I always stress is you may have the right to shoot somebody, which is a big responsibility, right? But you don't always have to do that, right? You may have the right to grab somebody or handcuff somebody, but you don't always have to. You may have the right to arrest that father for drug violations, but you don't have to, right? So to always keep yourself open to those options. And one of my mantras is don't let bad tactics lead to a good use of force, right? Always use good tactics, and then you'll be able to de-escalate and not cause a problem. So those are some of the things that they came up with the report. One of the biggest things I heard from officer line level was this, there's an emphasis on being guardians rather than warriors. And I understood what the officers were saying, right? Because so many situations we get involved in, we have to defend ourselves or defend somebody else. So you have to be able to do that. And throughout the course of the report, officers seen that, and they looked at it as, well, yeah, now we can't train to be warriors, or we can't be ready to be warriors or defend ourselves. And I kept on saying, no, you're overreaching there. It's a combined thing, right? We should emphasize being guardians, right? Because that's what we are. We are guardians, and be ready if we need to be not a warrior, but defend ourselves or defend somebody else. And I heard that a lot. I used the actual 21st Century Policing report in our promotional exam, in our last promotional exam. So part of what we do in a promotional exam is the officers that want to be sergeants, they have to read several different books. We put them in different scenarios. And one of the things I wanted them to read was the 21st Century Policing report. And I had several people come to me and said that they disagreed with that in particular. And I knew that those people weren't ready to be sergeants, right? They didn't have an open mind, and they weren't able to look at things from different points of view. But the other officers that eventually scored high on the list and eventually got promoted were the ones that understood that. So I use it as a measure. I use it all the time. It's something that I'm proud of to say that both police departments that I worked in had already incorporated a lot of these pillars into our policing. But both actually, after the report came out, did a better job and continue to do a better job. So you're never at the point where, okay, we've done it, we've accomplished it. It's a constant work in progress. So I know I've talked a lot, so I'm kind of gonna open it up to some questions that people have. Okay, I got one from Brenda. Can you guys hear me? I hope. What kind of FOIA issues does your department see? So we typically see over 350 FOIAs a year. And I actually, myself and my administrative assistant handle the FOIAs in our police department. I want to see what people are FOIAing. I'm interested in it. And I want to make sure we're doing a good job. Most of it is related to domestic issues, child custody issues. But we do get a lot of FOIAs from people that want, if there's a bigger case, robberies, news media FOIAs. As we move forward, what my concern is, we'll probably double our FOIAs when we get our body cameras online. And that's something that's really going to tax our department. So we'll probably see at least over 500 a year, which I'll have to come up with a different system and probably get some help handling those FOIAs. So I hope that answers that for you, Brenda. I got a question from Liz. Have you had to deal with officers who have served in the military in combat zones and have had to reprogram some of the training they've had as soldiers? This is a really, really good question, Liz. I've got three officers right now that are in the military, and they're still in the military. They're in the reserves. One of my officers is going to get deployed next month. He's going to Iraq. He's going to be there for a year. He just got married. He doesn't want to go, and he is the nicest officer you could ever meet, and you would never even realize that he's a soldier, right? He's in the National Guard. So it's one thing I've thought about, and we've talked about it. I said, when you come back, how are we going to actually kind of reintroduce you to police work again? It's going to be different for you. He's going to be a police officer there on base. That's going to be his duties. But he's going to have to go through some transitions. And then I have another officer that is in the Marines, and he is going to get deployed for about 3 months, but mostly training. He's had 3 deployments to the Middle East before, and he has struggled coming back. So and we've had open conversations about it. It's something we've talked about. And he's something he's working on constantly. So it's something you got to be cognizant of, and you have to work on it. There was an officer that I worked with in Naperville that struggled with this exact thing, to the point where he's not a police officer anymore. And one of the things, probably there was an early recognition of it, but maybe just not like a plan, right? We didn't have a plan. It was just like, okay, we got to watch them. You definitely have to have a plan. It has to be something that you've talked about with that officer, and you're going to execute it with them. And there's an expectation of, this is what we're going to do. No ifs, ands, or buts. You may be fine, but we're going to go through this together. So what is the role of the police union? So I've had a lot of experience with the police union. When I was in Naperville, I was on the executive board for the police union for Fraternal Order of Police. And then when I got promoted to sergeant, I was on the executive board for that union as well. And what I thought my role is to advise the officers and be a conduit of information between the command staff and the rank and file. We didn't have that. We didn't have a significant issues as far as police discipline. There was. So you were actually a representative for that officer. If they had a discipline issue or there was an investigation, that officer would ask you to stand in and sit with them kind of as a witness, and you would kind of advise that officer as you moved forward. But most often it was more of that conduit of information, and it's the same thing in Woodridge. It's a different union in Woodridge. It's Metropolitan Alliance of Police, but I use our police union leadership as a sounding board for all kinds of things. We just finished a policy on our body-worn cameras, and it was interesting because not many departments have a policy on it with their union. They have a policy, but not in their contract with their union employees. But I had no problem with it, right? I knew what we needed to do. I knew the purpose of the body-worn cameras. Talked to our union leadership. They were on board. They understood it. We worked together. And if you have a relationship like that, it works good. And a lot of times you'll hear, and it was just on the news before I got on this call, they had the FOP president for Chicago on. It's different. It's different where we're at. I understand Chicago is a whole different thing. Their police union is a different thing. But as far as my concern is as far as being a police chief, I find the union leadership very, very helpful and helping me move the department in the right direction. So, Mary Ann, what are the criteria for hiring new policemen? Police officers, we like to say. This is changing too, and it's changing pretty much as I'm speaking. So I'm frustrated with our process and our criteria for hiring. It takes over a year to hire somebody. It takes over a year to train them. Right now, I'm down 2 officers, and there's no academies because of COVID. So what I have done in the interim during these times where I can't get people into the academy, we do laterals. So we're putting it out this week for lateral positions. So any officer who's in Illinois could come to our police department and be a police officer for us. We've gotten some really, really good laterals. The most recent one came from Mundelein, awesome officer. But we've had some laterals that didn't really fit the mission statement of what Woodridge policing is about. And we've had to let those officers go. So you're taking a risk. A lot of times you're wondering why that officer wants to leave his current agency. Has it been problematic? Is it going to be problematic for us? But the necessity is that we have to do that in order to keep the ranks full because we can't get people hired fast enough and we can't get them to an academy. But the traditional way, you have to go through a written exam and you have to get 70% on that written exam. From that point, you go to an oral interview with our board, and there's some members of our field training officers in there. You pass that, you get a conditional offer. You got to take a polygraph. You got to take a drug test. You got to take a medical test. And that takes a good 8 to 9 months to get through their process. And the generation of prospective officers at this point get frustrated with that long process. So I'm working on streamlining it and making sure that when we do our written test, typically what we do our written test, everybody has to come on a Saturday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning. And we take the test all together. We're expanding that to make it online, different locations in the city at different colleges. We're going to do it to try to increase our diversity as far as our workforce goes. So that's constantly changing, and it's changing. I got a meeting about it tomorrow. So it's a good question, Mary Ann. Appreciate that one. I got one from Connie. Going back to working with schools, are your officers actually in school working with the GRIP program? Yes, they are. Actually, it's only one officer that does the GRIP program. I wish I could send multiple officers, but I really don't have the budget for that. And is there any other positive school interaction your department has? One of the things we do with the school interaction is that one officer teaches the GRIP program, but he'll often bring somebody with him as a partner. And officers are encouraged to go into the schools at any given point, talk to the teachers, talk to the kids, have a cup of coffee, eat their donuts, and hang out. And the officers do that. I always want them to do it more, but they do that. And I spend a lot of time at the schools too. I try to catch a few basketball games, girls and boys, every year. At the first day of the school year, every school has multiple officers there to greet them. So it's been a goal of ours to kind of reach out to those kids. And the schools make it easy, because I was talking before we started today that they're a captive audience. You got them at school. Since COVID started, it's made it difficult for us. So I've tried to have Zoom meetings. That's been difficult. What we have been doing in the summertime is we have several programs, a basketball tournament, but we have what we call community roll calls, where we'll go to a neighborhood, and that's where we see the kids come out because we bring all kinds of stuff, giveaways, and usually the neighborhood cooks for us, and we'll have like a little picnic, and then people get asked questions that way. So we've had some good response, especially with younger kids coming to those programs. But it's a constant goal of ours to increase our interaction with high school age kids. In Woodridge, it's a little tougher because we don't have a high school in town. Downers Grove South is the one the most kids go to, and that's actually in Downers. So we lose that kind of connection. but it's something we're constantly working on. A group that helps me with that high school age group is a group called JANO. It's Janes Avenue Neighborhood Outreach. And I should have talked about this earlier when we talked about community policing. I truly believe community policing isn't driven by the police department, right? It should be called the community, right? It's called community for a reason, but it shouldn't be policing at all. So Janes Avenue Neighborhood Outreach is a group of people that have kind of addressed some issues that have happened in that Janes Avenue corridor. We have a lot of multi-family neighborhoods in that area. And there's a lot of teenage kids, younger kids that need outreach. And we have multiple picnics a year. We have events for them. And I come as a guest, but not as running it. I'm just part of one of the workers, right? I'm there loading up the food or cleaning up after them or scheduling the games. And to me, that's the perfect example of community outreach. I'd rather call it community outreach than community policing, because to make a difference, it's not about the police department driving it. It's about people in the neighborhood driving it. So they have a website if you want to check it out. It's a great organization. It's done great things and helped me tremendously. So. Okay, Roberta, sometimes people should not be put into the criminal justice system. For instance, people with mental issues or drug addiction. Are you able to divert such people into more appropriate paths for treatment? This is a constant goal of ours too. Yeah, I agree with you on this, Roberta, that we have to divert. With juveniles, it's very, very easy for us. We rarely send somebody into the criminal justice system as a juvenile. We'll come up with all kinds of things for them to do. And some people get upset. We've had some pretty high profile juvenile cases in the last year in particular that we diverted away from the criminal justice system, and people thought that was doing a disservice. And one of them involves some very, very young girls, 7th graders, that were doing inappropriate things on social media, racially inappropriate things. And that was a tough one because I could see where people wanted them expelled from schools. So we looked at that. We looked at each case individually and came up with the proper course of action for it. Some people were upset by that, but ultimately you got to look at that and look for different avenues for people, especially young people, just to make sure that they're not getting diverted into the criminal justice system. When it comes to mental health, this is a little bit difficult. We've been working with an individual. I was counting it up today. We've dealt with this person 12 times since 12 times since March with mental health issues. He's suicidal. He's attempted suicide several times. He's barricaded to the point where we've had to call a SWAT team out to help us. We were able to negotiate with him. Our 2 officers that were able to talk him out of that situation had extensive crisis intervention training and used that training to talk him out. And when that happened, I made a huge deal about it, right? Because that's what we should be doing. To the point when younger in my career, if you made a really good felony arrest, you got accolades from your supervisor. Well, these officers got accolades from me just for the fact that they did exactly what we want them to do. They brought somebody out and nobody was hurt. But unfortunately, despite numerous times that this person has been voluntarily admitted to mental health treatment and also involuntary admitted, we had still contact with him. We had a recent contact with him last month. And we have got information from his ex-wife that he wanted to die via suicide by police officer. And a lot of people choose that or want that to happen. She told us, and she showed us that he had texted her that what his plan was, and he went to a local drugstore and tried to accost somebody, knowing that we would come and respond. Luckily, we had that previous information. The officers were aware of it, recognized him from previous contacts, and again, de-escalated to the point where obviously he wasn't hurt. But we know that this person, he's got mental health issues, wants us to shoot him, and we're trying our best not to. And we've done everything possible to divert it right away from the criminal justice system to the point where and this is the hard part with police work. We deal with the worst of everything, right? And a lot of people have been through the system numerous times, whether it be mental health, drug addiction, criminal courts, juvenile court, and we're getting them at the tail end. But a lot of people look at us as, you know, if you get in a situation, a use of force situation with somebody's mental health, the first thing people say is, well, maybe a social worker should have went there. I could tell you that a social worker has been involved in this guy's life for months. I know for a fact, and it hasn't helped this person's intent on, you know, harming himself, and he actually wants us to do it. So made the decision that we needed to put him into the criminal justice system, right? Because I was concerned that he was going to force our officers to do something that I didn't want to happen. We ended up charging him, which we usually don't when these situations happen. But when he got to the criminal justice system, the judge, and I understand this, says he's mentally ill, so he shouldn't be in the criminal justice system. He should be in mental health treatment. The problem is every time he goes to mental health treatment, he stays there for 2 or 3 weeks and he gets released with no resolution to what's going on with him. So it's hard, right? And it makes it tough. So we try our best. We try to use every resource we can. So I don't know. That's the best way I can answer that. Each case is different. So I hope that helps you a little bit, Roberta. I got one from Nancy Savoda. I recognize Nancy, right? You shared admirable pillars and accomplishments. However, I don't remember you mentioning some basics like traffic. I think driving violations of laws are increasing, such as speeding, making me fearful when attempt to walk across the street, and drivers treating stop signs as yield signs, making intersections dangerous. Do you see the same thing? If so, what is being done? I agree with you, Nancy. I am very, very concerned about traffic violations. We have a traffic unit, and we have what we call selective enforcement. So in particular, if you have an issue in your neighborhood, we'll put it out to the officers that, hey, we need to spend time in that area and do traffic enforcement. I can tell you that things have definitely changed as far as people's attitudes in driving. And it's scaring me a little bit, not a little bit, a lot. We're dealing with a lot of people that when they are stopped by the police, they'll take off, especially if they have something else criminal in their car. If they have warrants, if they have drugs in their car, they just take off. We have a no pursuit policy for a variety of reasons. So it's frustrating to some of the officers. For the month of December, there was one officer in particular that had 4 people take off from him. It's kind of straight up traffic routine, and then they just take off. And what we're finding, especially when it's occurring at night, is we'll find out later that the car was stolen. We're having a lot of those issues in DuPage County. People will steal cars and then they'll go out and do additional crimes. And then when you try to stop them as a police officer, they just take off. But I think, Nancy, you're probably talking about the more traditional kind of traffic concerns, and it is something that we work on constantly. I encourage people to call us, tell us what the locations are, and we'll do our best to handle that. Love your school reply. Thank you, Connie. From Liz, have you ever had to deal with any officers that get interested in white supremacists? If so, how do you handle that? I have not. I think a lot of people assume that there are police officers that way, and I know, I read about it all the time, but I haven't had to do that at all. Fortunately, knock on wood. I've had situations where I've had officers involved in complaints about racial issues. I've taken them very serious. I have suspended officers for those kind of things, but nothing about white supremacists at all. It's something that we talk about as a police department. It's obviously against our policies. We monitor people's social media as far as the police department is concerned, and I have no evidence of that occurring with any Woodridge police officers. How does the police department collect and record data? We have a system where we, it's DuPage County wide. We have a system that monitors how much reports we do, who we're going out, our outreach. We track our UCRs, those are our crimes and data. I get it monthly. It's like one of the exciting days of the month that I have when that report comes out, because I like kind of going through it to see the differences and what's happening. And I like to look at it to see if we need to change things. So I get that report monthly and then yearly. I can say that 2020 is a little bit different, but in 2019, we had the lowest Part 1 crime rate that we've ever had in Woodridge. And it's kind of shocking. But it was for a lot of work by the police officers and also by the community that has helped us out. So I'm very proud of that. And in 2020, it rose, but not significantly. We're still pretty low in comparison, especially when you look at it from the 90s. The crime rate, especially Part 1 crimes, which is the most serious crimes, were very, very high in the 90s. And in comparison, kind of non-existent in the current years. Roberta, thank you for your answer. Thank you, Roberta. Brenda, you only get one question. I'm just kidding. Is the Woodridge Police Department representative of the community in terms of racial makeup? If so, is that by design? This is an awesome question. It's something that I work on constantly. We are not, right? We're not where we need to be. As far as Latino X, we're doing pretty good. We have a lot of Hispanic officers on the police department. We only have 2 African-American officers. And it's something we've reached out. I grew up on the South Side. I have a lot of connections through Governor State, which is a very diverse school. So I've reached out to them at every test we have. I work with a group called Unity Partnership. Maybe some of you have heard of them. I reach out to them every time we have any kind of opening on the police department. Hey, send me some applicants. And I've been on the Illinois Diversity Commission and trying to increase African-American candidates, not only in Woodridge, but in DuPage County, acting as a mentor for potential candidates. It's hard to reach that population. And I reach out to the faith-based community to help me. And a lot of it probably goes back to, it's just not a job that that they think is a primary thing that they want to go to. It's not a path that they see for themselves. And I know that there's a lot of police chiefs in DuPage County in particular are trying to change that. Right after COVID, we had obviously anticipated struggling with our budget, right? So we had froze our hiring, and we were going to hire an African-American female officer who I think has great potential. And she was to start, I can't remember the exact date, but she was supposed to start the academy on a Monday. We froze our hiring on a Wednesday, and I had to tell her that we couldn't hire her. And I was like so disappointed. But I told her to hang in there. I said, I'm going to keep trying to work on this, and hopefully we'll see some light at the end of the tunnel. So I ended up writing a memo to our board saying how important diversity was for the police department. And I thought that this particular candidate, Officer Scroggins is her name, had great potential to be a great officer and also a great representative of the police department and someone the community can look up to. And then the board decided that, yeah, this made all the sense in the world. I was able to call her back and say, hey, we're going to hire you. You're going to start the academy. I got it all worked out. And she is now in field training. But she stood by. I called her all the time. She always had a positive attitude. And that's what I liked about her. I was always calling her with bad news. Hey, there's no academy because of COVID. Hey, we can't hire you because of the financial stuff. Hey, I tried, but I'm going to have to wait another month to go to the board meeting. She always had a positive attitude. She always told me she wanted to work in Woodridge. And now she is. So yeah, it's something you got to work hard at, and we'll continue to work hard at. We're not where we need to be, but it's something we're working on, Brenda. From Liz, thanks for doing the webinar on the night of the National Football Championship. Yep. Well, my wife's surprised I'm doing that. Juanita, thank you for your presentation. I appreciate all your personal examples and the sincere way you talk about methods of de-escalation and building trust with the community. I also grew up on the south side of Chicago. I appreciate all your outreach efforts. Keep up the good work. Very cool. Yeah, when I worked, I grew up in West Inglewood, 6615 South Hoyne. So yeah, learned a lot of lessons growing up in that neighborhood, and a lot of life lessons. So it helped me in my career and actually my personal life as well. So, all right, I think that's it. I really appreciate everybody joining in. I felt like I was just kind of talking to myself. I hope it was interactive, and I hope we learned something. I definitely learned something from everybody here and some really great questions. I think what I like about these forums, and Mary, I really appreciate you inviting me, is that people take the time to actually listen and we actually talk about things. And I think that's definitely what's lacking in society at this point. You don't always have to agree, right? But meet people where they're at and just have some open communication. I think, I hope and I pray that that's where we're moving for in this country. So I appreciate you having me on.
Well, I'd like to thank you for coming, especially when the circumstances aren't always good, you know? So thank you so much for coming and doing this with us. And I'd like to also thank the members of the Criminal Justice Study Group and also the League of Women Voters of Illinois and everyone who took time out of their evening to be here. Thank you very much and good night.
Okay. See you, Mary.